Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see you again. Welcome back to another GM tip video with myself, Hydra. This is our 5th video. Please make sure to check out all the others, and thank you for liking and subscribing and all of those other things. Today we are going to be talking about big bad creation or adversary creation. So what makes a good one and when to introduce them into your campaign, as well as how to introduce them, because tough question, I don't think I've ever seen a GM tip video on it, so ahead of the curve here, fulfilling needs that you didn't even know existed. So that's our goals to one side. Let's just get started now with the meat of this video, which is a list of qualities to help us define what makes a good adversary or big bad within your campaign. So, number 1, they should be the primary opposition to the hero. That should be taking into account the context of your plot, your precipitating event, and what your campaign is about. Remember, you should be able to summarize your campaign in 40 words or less. This is a campaign about a group of players trying to survive winter in the wilderness. Okay. So your big bad, your primary adversary, needs to be the primary opposition to this. Nice and simple. The question is for you, how are they going to do it? But we'll come back to that in a while. But that's something so important to remember. If they're not the primary opposition, then quite simply they're boring, because they don't need to be dealt with. They're an option, they're a side quest, they're a mean person that should probably be bonked on the head. But it's not particularly interesting and they'll be entirely forgettable. Speaking of that, they should seem unbeatable at the beginning, because if you want any drama, any tension, any suspense, even within a fantasy setting, even within a fun game around the table, a big bad, if you introduce them as something entirely beatable, then you're going to have a particularly forgettable character guaranteed. Now, what quality makes them unbeatable, we're going to talk about later. Typically, you work with what your party is good at and make sure that the bad guy is introduced as better at it significantly. But there are ways to do this. We're going to come back toward the end of the video and talk about that in more detail. But remember, they should appear unbeatable. It should be obvious as well. Now, they can seem friendly, and this could be because they are hidden. It could be before a betrayal. Or it could be before the protagonists change their point of view and decide actually that this person all along is not going to be someone that they can work with due to XYZ. Let's say you're on an alien planet, you find a very spicy looking blue girl that you fall in love with, and it turns out your boss that was particularly xenophobic is now going to be an issue to your spicy love affair. That's right, this is the sort of thing that can happen in Avatar, but you as a GM don't have full control over your players' spicy love affairs, so that individual plot might be a difficult one to work with unless you have a bunch of very susceptible weebs, but otherwise challenging to do, but entirely doable. And I'd love to hear some stories down in the comments if anyone's managed to do this, have effectively what starts off as a mentor or overseer character not even turn into a big bad, but have the player's viewpoint about them shift as they become a big bad due to the players changing. I'd be really interested to see if anyone's done it around a TTRPG table, but that can be done. It can be done. Now, obviously, they can just simply be the betrayal. It was you all along, Moriarty. You are my brother. It could be that simple, but in which case, you're not going to be introducing them as the big bad because it's a mystery. We'll come on how to do that later. Anyway. They also don't have to be a bad person. They can be a good person. A lot of adversaries within love stories are simply your ex-wife, your girlfriend that you can't let go of. They're your adversary because you need them so badly. You need them still. By the end of the film, you can get over it. You can move on with your life. You could make the argument that the adversary is yourself, but it's not really the case. There has to be, and this is where we move on to the next one, a physical manifestation as a person to represent this obstacle to your primary goal. But let's just go back to doesn't have to be a bad person for a second, because we haven't quite finished with that. Try and think of the films where the bad guy, have hair issues, where the bad guy was very one-dimensional, pure evil, just did evil for evil's sake. Now, they're quite hard to think of because they're very forgettable, because they're dull, they're boring, they're not interesting. This is why a lot of GMs don't like evil player characters, because 99% of the time it's just people being a dick for the sake of it. We'll do a video on that at a later date, but typical villains that are good are not entirely evil, and they have a belief system that makes sense. It doesn't mean it's morally right, it doesn't mean it's justified, although it could be. As I said, they don't have to even be evil to be an adversary. They could just be in direct competition business-wise with the players and be completely kosher. But it does kind of make them a little bit easier to deal with in a roleplay setting where, let's face it, everyone wants to go around and stab the big bad repeatedly. Maybe your players would feel a little let down if they didn't have someone who was at least very questionable to deal with. Now, in that situation, if you want them to be memorable, they should have a belief system that you can get your head inside and you can actually think of as that viewpoint. I am using slaves because without them, we would die of starvation. I'm not justifying slave trades before anyone gets me cancelled, but you can have a villain that does that, and it's a belief system that you at least understand the thought process in it, even if it's faulty, and therefore when it comes to role-playing them, you can make it a damn sight more interesting. You can have them talk to player characters, you can have them pre-presented as this guy that's doing very questionable things according to your players' morality, and they could become an increasingly large problem as the campaign goes on. Lots to think about with this one, but really an opposing belief system to the players is a really good way to introduce an adversary fairly early on, and through the situations of the campaign, they can become a larger and larger obstacle. Or they can be the primary obstacle straight away. We're going to talk about this in just a moment. Lastly, it needs to be a single entity so it can be visualized as a person that could be interacted with, because it makes it more interesting and it makes it a story that you can extrapolate information about. Remember when we talked earlier about why people tell stories? It's so that you can extrapolate information, you can gain something from it. And this isn't just for the hero, it's not just do what the hero does. Villains are effectively extreme ideologies and cautionary tales about what happens if you take that line of thinking too far. That's typically where a good villain comes from. It is, we must slaughter some people in this town and feed them to the gods, otherwise we're all going to die. That's our belief system, and you know, that is at least you can follow the logic from A to B, and then you can really role play that, get into it, and decide what they're going to do as well, keeping them consistent. So if you don't have a belief system for a big bad, you don't have a big bad yet. Make sure you've got one. Make sure your players are going to look at it and be like, that's going to be a problem for what we want to achieve. Okay, now the question is, how about monsters? Does this still apply? Well, in the case of monsters, it needs to be capable of thinking, planning, and hatred, ideally, otherwise it's not scary. If it is something you can outsmart, it is not intimidating. Jaws was scary because Jaws was large, Jaws was clever, Jaws was like a freak shark. So if you're going to introduce a troll as a big bad within a campaign, which is perfectly fine to do, it needs to be a special troll. It needs to be something about it that's weird. An older troll, perhaps it can speak, perhaps it recognizes your face, your smell, perhaps it even knows certain words. Now, it's not to say you're going to be articulating a conversation with this troll. They're not the best examples of making it terrifying, perhaps having it able to talk, but having it able to understand you, make plans around your actions. Ugh, terrifying. That is actually terrifying. Big bads are much, much better when they are exceptions rather than the rule, because you have an element of unknown, you have an element of unpredictability, which means you can't just make a plan as to let's go hunt the troll down with torches. That might not work, because maybe the troll can make it rain because of some weird dark magic that's tied into it. Wouldn't that be kind of weird? But hey, it makes it a lot more interesting. So let's move on from our thinking, planning, walking, talking troll. Now we have to think about how we're going to introduce our big bads or primary obstacles in these campaigns. Well, you need to consider your genre and theme, and you need to consider your plot. They're very, very important things, because all of those will basically generate possible big bads or adversaries for you, depending on what your players are aiming to do. But first we're going to take the question of the when, or the how. Actually, we'll do both at the same time, why not? Firstly, we can introduce them as a comparison to something that's already been established within the campaign. So by that, I mean the group go out and do some hunting at the beginning, and they come back with a boar and slam it on the table. Let's say we're going to go with more of a social big bad within this setting. It's not like a major boss fight just yet, but it obviously will be by the end. One of the other hunters slams down an even larger boar on the table. Now you've introduced him as an adversary. He's a better hunter than you are. You are taking whatever has been demonstrated to be the case and showing that this person is better at it. They're beyond the capabilities of what's been demonstrated thus far. That way, it is packaging all of the knowledge that's been built about the world thus far and what can be done, and made sure that you understand that whatever happens in that, this person can do more of it, which is much more powerful than just saying, we have a hyper-intelligent enemy for you to fight. That's only interesting. Hyper-intelligent enemies are only interesting if you have a really smart protagonist. Sherlock Holmes, Moriarty. Why is Moriarty smart and not strong? Because that would be dumb. It wouldn't be interesting, because he wouldn't be based on Holmes +1. That's the whole concept. He outsmarts your protagonist, making you take everything the protagonist has done and believe this person can do that plus more. So it's Holmes +1. That's one way of doing it. And it could be any skill set. It could be just simple bloody violence. It could be wealth. It could be any attribute, and you can make them appear more imposing. Now, another way of doing this is to introduce a side character like a mentor, and this is done quite a lot, and this ties into one of the later ways to introduce, but effectively that mentor can be messed with, kidnapped, taken away by this big bad or adversary, and that can have a similar effect. The mentor is the person that is above the players in hierarchy and capability. You know that because they're a grizzled veteran, you've introduced them in such a way, and then all of a sudden they're swept away by this big bad. Really, really standard trope, but you instantly know that this person's not someone you can deal with. Let's say a really simple way to do this. Really simple way, just a free idea for you. Have the players have a dummy fight with their, let's say, leader, their sergeant, their boss early on. Just do some weapon training and show off how good he is. Have him have some talents, some traits, some spells, whatever suited to the genre. Okay, now the players realise that this person can kick the living daylights out of them. They know how good he is relative to them. Obviously, dice are involved, so it's a bit random. And then have him get beaten up by someone else, which creates this mysteriously terrifying person that is clearly better than the thing they've seen that's better than them. Much more interesting way to introduce a challenge to the players, because it's an unknown quantity, but at least you know it's scary. Okay, so that's one way of making an introduction via comparison. Timing-wise, it's all down to your plot, to your story, and, to be honest, whatever you feel is right. You can introduce a big bad in your introduction, but they won't be introduced as a, oh my god, you have to kill this person. It'll just be, yeah, here's a dude, he's doing a thing. You could even be doing a job for them. It doesn't matter. You just have to make sure that their opposing belief system is going to be relevant to the overall plot. So you have to be considering your precipitating event. Hopefully you're still with me. Stay in there. Hang in there. It's not that bad, is it? It's really not that bad. Anyone wants clarification, by the way, hit me up down in the comments. Now, the next one we're going to go to is via their actions. Introduction via action. This is really, really good if you're looking to do horror, tension, suspense, or betrayal. So you don't want anyone to know what the bad guy is. Maybe it's a monster. You don't want them to know what the monster is. Maybe it's a person, they're a psychopath, and you don't want them to know who it is. It's a mysterious person. Now, what you do, therefore, is you introduce them by their actions. Now, lots of crime thrillers do this. You see the crime scenes, and you as the heroes infer what they're like based on their actions. In which case, you as the GM, need to know what they're like so you can create actions to paint a picture of what they're like. If they're horrific, if they're XYZ, once you've got that belief system, if they think humans are expendable, there may just be a trail of corpses. But how would they kill them if they thought humans were expendable? They wouldn't necessarily just cut their limbs off and like strip their skin off for no reason. It would just be a, let's just kill them, that's efficient. So have the belief system and then you know how to paint the scenes. But you need to sell their characteristics via their actions. It could be truly horrific. It could just be lots of dead bodies, a few too many to be comfortable with in a roleplay campaign. Like the average dead body here and there is pretty much a given. But something to think about. Now, keep in mind the show don't tell. Don't say, I saw a troll. Say, I found half a sheep. Much more interesting. Makes their imagination go off as well. Great. Now we're going to go as introduce someone to hate. Now that is done sometimes with introducing someone that does an act that instantly sets apart the differences between the two. Now it doesn't have to be instantly someone you have to deal with, but you can introduce them as someone that's clearly not going to get along with the party. That sort of bullyish dick that lives in the town doing bad things. That's certainly one option. Or you could go with someone that just maybe has ripped off the players' families by charging them an extortionate amount of tax. They're instantly unlikable. Now, typically in a film, your hero at that point is going to be motivated by hatred to deal with them. So in most occasions, it is going to be really obvious that they are a real problem. So the sort of the recruitment of Luke Skywalker could almost be into this. He's had his family killed. We got a little bit of a revenge arc to go through here. So that's a potential way of looking at it. You don't have to kill every PC's families, but it's certainly an entry point into it, and a rather chilling one for a roleplay session. But hey, why not? Why not? So that ties in the three major ways to introduce them. Remember, by comparison, by implication via their actions, and also as a mere opposition of morality, so you can hate them and have to deal with them because of that. Now, here's the last question for you guys. How does the big bad tie into your precipitating event and plot? You need to answer this. You need to be able to answer this, because then you know what your big bad's going to do. You know why they're getting in the way. If we have our survival game set out in the woods and our players go out early, they hunt down a deer because there's no food in the town, it was killed by something, they're not quite sure what. Well, how is a big bad going to get in the way of that? Okay, maybe he is going to try and take people out into the woods, and the group, their morality is, no, don't do that. It's really scary. It's going to get you all killed. And he's just gradually going to get everyone killed through his own stubbornness. That's a case of a non-evil adversary that is going to basically whittle away the remaining 10 members of the hamlet until there's no one left. He's still an adversary. He could be the primary adversary. The troll that's killing them all could be the background. That's not the real adversary. Maybe there's two adversaries. That's a cool way of looking at it. It's essential you understand what your story is about. Remember that 40-word rule, that this is a campaign about our players trying to survive the winter. Okay, now we know what our campaign is about and what our plot is. It's going from a state to alive in the winter to a state of alive and it's not winter anymore. So it's a passage of time they're trying to get through. Now you can say who or how or what would get in the way of that survival. And it can be so many things. It could be someone else competing for resources. Doesn't have to be a bad person. It could be a monster in the woods trying to eat you while you're trying to survive for a long period of time. I would make the argument that's not quite so well suited, because if they're trying to survive for a long period of time, then as soon as they kill it, you're still left with the issue that the long period of time hasn't passed yet, unless you're like, oh yeah, all of a sudden winter's not scary anymore. So remember, once you know what your story is about, if you're doing a survival campaign about surviving through winter, come up with an appropriate adversary that is literally going to get in the way of them achieving their objective until they're dealt with, reasoned with, talked to, and of course, if it is a character with a strong belief system, do not let them get talked out of their belief system with a charm test, because otherwise they're not a villain. Remember, maximum natural 20 plus 6SL is best possible answer, and the best possible response to you saying, hey, actually, maybe we need that food for our town. I know you're taking it for your people, but we need it too. And you roll a natural 20 and they're like, oh yeah, of course, you do need it more than us here. No, that was never going to happen. It was never possible due to their belief system. So best possible is they throw you a sack of grain and laugh as the sack has a rip in it, and they just laugh at you. Or maybe it's rotten grain. That's the best you were ever going to get out of them. That's fine. Don't destroy big bads with a charm test if they're going to be social. Anyway, putting that to one side, thank you very much for stopping on by again. This has actually turned out to be longer than I thought, but hopefully it was really interesting. I actually think it'll be quite helpful because it's given me a lovely way to really visualize big bads, challenges, how to introduce obstacles, and I'm looking forward to the next video. Let me know down in the comments what you want to see. Thank you for all the patrons to support and for support of me in this thing that I do called YouTube. Take care, ladies and gentlemen. See you next time.